Emergencies do not always announce themselves with sirens. Sometimes, they arrive with perfect timing. Exactly when you decide to rest. Exactly when you plan to leave. Exactly when you sit down to think. A phone lights up. A message pings. A voice says, "There's no time to explain." Your body stands before your mind can vote. Your calendar dissolves. Your standards shrink to a single word that has been smuggled into your life and crowned above all others. Urgent. The fire drills begin. You are drafted into firefighting that keeps you too tired to notice the arsonist. Adrenaline replaces judgment. Urgency replaces truth. Survival mode becomes your personality. You start measuring your worth by the speed of your response rather than by the quality of your results. You start calling exhaustion duty. You start calling chaos purpose. You forget what your own voice sounds like when it is not raised. If this feels familiar, it is because someone or something is puppeteering your crisis reflex. Crisis puppeteering is not always malicious. Sometimes it is clumsy. Sometimes it is cultural. Often it is simply a habit that learned it could control you. The mechanics are ordinary and therefore effective. Wear down a man's sleep. Give him a whistle to chase. Reward his sprint with a compliment. Repeat. Soon, he will come running at the sound of the whistle even when there is no smoke. Soon, he will confuse speed with virtue and fatigue with proof. Soon, he will organize his identity around saving days he could have designed not to burn. Ask the questions that reveal the strings. Why do emergencies appear exactly when you try to leave? Why do they flare when you sit to think? Why is the crisis never scheduled when you announced your availability 3 days ago? Why is there always a missing document at 2200, a forgotten password at boarding time, a deadline that somehow was invisible until the hour you finally planned to keep a promise to yourself? The obvious answer is incompetence. The less obvious answer is control. A man who can trigger your urgency can purchase your attention at a discount. The more afraid you are of being called irresponsible, the cheaper your consent becomes. The more you confuse panic with importance, the easier it is to rent your nervous system for someone else's priorities. The psychology is not mystical. A nervous system trained on alarms will accept alarms as truth. The cognitive architecture that follows is predictable. First, salience dominates. What is loud steals authority from what is likely. Second, availability deforms judgment. The freshest catastrophe in your memory feels like the most probable. Third, narrowing occurs. Threat collapses your field of vision to immediate levers. You stop asking whether the fire is real. You ask only where the nearest bucket is. You become a competent servant to whatever screams. David Hume left a sentence sturdy enough to carry across centuries of noise. A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. Panic proportions belief to volume. The puppeteer knows this and speaks loudly. There is also the social economy. In some rooms, a man earns status by being the first to sprint. He is praised for showing up, no matter how often the alarm proved false. He is thanked for staying late, even when the lateness is the interest payment on a month of avoidable delays. Compliments become coupons that buy your continued presence. You are paid in reputation for loss of autonomy. The exchange feels honorable until you count. You notice that the same men who start fires are masters of saying thank you into microphones. You notice that your private life is being repackaged as public loyalty. You notice that what began as dedication has turned into a depletion strategy with applause. Crisis puppeteering also recruits your fear of moral failure. You are a man who does not abandon his post. You were raised to be the one who carries the extra weight. You have learned to enjoy the taste of your own endurance. A puppeteer only needs to frame every interruption as a test of loyalty. We need you. Only you can fix this. It would mean a lot. The language is soft. The hook is hard. You pay with evenings you promised to your craft. You pay with mornings that belonged to your clarity. You pay with the one resource your work cannot function without: quiet. Marcus Aurelius wrote like a man who had to govern a storm without letting the storm govern his mind. His sentences are plain because panic loves poetry. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The line does not deny the existence of fires. It denies their jurisdiction over your faculty of choice. When a crisis arrives, it attempts an annexation. It claims your attention by declaring sovereignty. Marcus reminds you that sovereignty is not taken, it is ceded. If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it. Judgment is the string the puppeteer wants. Judgment is what you must reclaim. How do the strings get tied in the first place? Through timing and reinforcement. Emergencies appear when you are about to change state. Rest. Leave. Think. State changes require energy. Fire alarms steal that energy and redirect it. Over time, your body begins to anticipate interruption at the thresholds. You dread transitions because you have learned that the world will not permit them. You stop scheduling deep work because it is humiliating to be dragged out of it. You stop leaving on time because you cannot bear the ritual of being pulled back by a late shout. You stop resting because you associate rest with ambush. Your life becomes a hallway of half rooms. Nothing is complete. Everything is urgent. You call this adulthood. It is captivity with a calendar. Add to this the drug of adrenaline. Adrenaline is honest. It makes you feel alive. It makes colors brighter. It makes time crisp. It makes the smallest decisions feel like cliffs. If your craft has been starved of real challenges, synthetic crises provide the impression of significance. You start chasing the high of being needed. You confuse the chemical clarity of stress with the moral clarity of purpose. You begin to believe that you are most yourself when the room is on fire, because that is the only time your boundaries go quiet. Afterwards, you lie awake replaying your feats. You call it responsibility. Your body calls it depletion. Consider the triangle many men trace without knowing its name. One day you are the rescuer. Another day you are the victim. On the worst day, you try out the third role without admitting it to your own mouth. Persecutor. A small accidental delay that creates the excuse you need to step in later. A tiny oversight that ensures a future emergency where you can be seen saving the day. You would never call it arson, but you can feel the thrill when the flames lick at the edge of a project that had grown boring. The puppeteer outside and the puppeteer inside are sometimes the same man. The distinction matters less than the mechanics. Fires follow the incentives. If emergency earns more than calm, you will get emergency. Ask the precise questions you have trained yourself to avoid because they embarrass your hero narrative. Who benefits when you sprint? Does the pattern cluster around certain people or institutions? Do alarms spike near deadlines for your own commitments? Do alarms follow your announced departures? Does your memory exaggerate the severity of past crises or minimize them? When you returned to those scenes with arrested head, what did you discover about their causes? Who verified the fire? Who named it? Who profited from the label? A man who can answer those without flinching will start to see the strings. Seeing is not cynicism, it is inventory. Hume's proportion returns here as a tool rather than a quote to admire. Evidence first, loudness second. A useful habit is to separate three things whenever the bell rings: signal, probability, impact. Signal asks what verifiable facts, names, times, numbers, tie to the claim that there is an emergency. Probability asks how often this kind of event, in this context, actually requires the level of response being demanded. Impact asks what happens if you do nothing for 60 minutes compared to what happens if you drop everything and comply. Without those three, your mind will default to volume and facial expressions. You will move at the speed of panic. Evidence is slower. Evidence is adult. Marcus adds the boundary that evidence alone cannot give. Just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter. In a crisis, the right thing often shrinks to the next plain act you can own. Not the most dramatic, not the most public, the most plain. Sending the file with the numbers that settle the argument. Making the phone call that reveals whether the threat is real. Closing your door for 8 minutes to read instead of skimming another paragraph of dread. Holding your tongue until your breathing rate returns to human. Answering the question that was asked rather than the accusation that was implied. These are not cinematic moves. That is why they work. Pay attention to how crises multiply when you begin to reclaim your schedule. Puppeteers escalate when the strings slacken. The more you refuse to be drafted, the more violent the rhetoric will sound. If you don't do this now, everything breaks. If you leave, we lose the client. If you rest today, we will be behind forever. Hume would ask for the base rate of everything. Marcus would ask whether you control the sky or your step. You cannot stop others from raising their voices. You can refuse to lower your standards of evidence to meet their volume. The mechanics of escalation are boring and therefore easy to miss. Ambiguity increases. Deadlines are suddenly today. Policies are cited vaguely. Names are dropped. Authority is implied with phrases like "they said" and "everyone knows." Ambiguity creates fog. Fog creates fear. Fear buys compliance. The countermove is equally boring. Ask for the sentence that binds you. Ask for the name on the order. Ask for the line in the contract. Ask for the precise risks of a 90-minute delay. Ask for the version history that shows the last time this truly was a fire. You will be called difficult. You will be called slow. You will be called arrogant. Wear the names. They weigh less than the strings. There is a posture that ends puppeteering without speeches. Verify the fire. Time box your help. Pause all commitments during escalation. Verify the fire means you separate smoke from steam. Some systems hiss when functioning correctly. Time box your help means when you do choose to assist, you name the start and the stop up front. I can give this 60 minutes. At the end, I return to what I planned. Pause all commitments during escalation means you refuse to make promises in a room full of adrenaline. No hiring decisions at midnight. No strategy shifts in a group chat. No life choices on an empty stomach. Hume would call this proportion. Marcus would call it dignity. Survival mode can masquerade as identity for so long that the exit feels like betrayal. Who are you if you are not the man who rushes in? What are you if your value is not calculated in last-minute saves? What replaces the applause when your days grow quiet? These are not small questions. They are the questions that keep men burning because the smoke proves they belong. The answer will not flatter the part of you that has learned to be loved for his scars. The answer is stewardship. The answer is a calendar that you defend as if your craft depended on it because it does. The answer is a temperament that refuses to let other people's anxiety pass through your mouth as if it were your own. Marcus offers an unglamorous doorway out of the theater. Today I escaped anxiety. Or no, I discarded it. The correction belongs taped to the backs of your hands. Escaping suggests the world cooperated. Discarding suggests you chose. When the next siren sounds, watch your first sentence. I have to. Replace it with, I will choose after I check. The difference is not aesthetic, it is jurisdictional. Hume would insist that your check include numbers, not vibes, numbers. How many incidents like this in the last 12 months? What was the actual loss the last 3 times? How long did we delay without consequence? Who verified those? Not to win an argument, to keep your mind. A puppeteer will always prefer to be invisible. The most effective string is the one you call your own idea. This is why the worst fires appear when you plan to think. Thought threatens strings. Silence reveals hands. The timing is not coincidence. It is a learned tactic. If you allow it to work 3 times in a row, it will be used 30. The counter is ritual. Place your thinking hours where alarms struggle to find you. Early. Offline. Out of sight lines where other people's urgency can see you sitting still and feel entitled to your stillness. Guard that ritual with the seriousness you bring to other men's flames. Without it, you will forget what you meant to build and end your year with a heroic logbook that contains nothing you wanted. There is a deeper arithmetic at work when crisis becomes culture. Drama is a subsidy for disorganization. If a team, a household, a city cannot plan, it can still run. Running masks the cost of ignorance by producing heat. Heat reads as effort. Effort is applauded. The applause pays for more heat. The machine perpetuates itself on praise, while the actual work of designing systems that do not burn is starved. Hume's cool eye would call this a failure of proportion. Marcus would call it a failure of rule over oneself. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Not by sprinting into the impediment every night, by changing the road in daylight. The most dangerous puppet string is the one tied to your shame. If you grew up in rooms where love arrived as rescue, you may feel dirty when you schedule your life away from chaos. If you learned that attention is rationed to the man who is bleeding loudest, you may believe you are selfish for refusing to join every emergency. If you were taught that competence is cold, you may sabotage your own systems to re-enter the warmth of collective panic. There is a way to honor the boy who learned those lessons without sentencing the man to live inside them. Hume gives you a scale to weigh stories against evidence. Marcus gives you a hand to calm your breath and decline the rehearsed apology. You will not become hard. You will become precise. What about the true fires? They exist. Buildings burn. Markets swing. Machines fail. Bodies break. Comrades stumble. The refusal to be puppeteered is not the refusal to be needed. It is the refusal to be controlled by the cheapest levers. A man who verifies the fire is faster, not slower, when the flames are real. A man who time boxes his aid turns 1 hour of clean effort into more value than 5 hours of theatrical presence. A man who pauses commitments during escalation reduces the number of secondary disasters created by promises made under the influence of cortisol. This is not theory. It is craft. The body must be trained alongside the mind. You cannot think proportion into a system that is starving. Feed yourself before you choose. Sleep before you interpret. Walk before you answer. Breathe before you agree. These are not slogans embroidered on pillows. They are instructions to return your biology to parameters that allow your prefrontal cortex to weigh evidence without the amygdala playing the drums. Marcus did not confuse virtue with punishment. He slept when he could. He ate when he should. He rode in the morning before Rome knocked. He built a life where fires could find him without finding him empty. A word about reputation. If you stop being the man who sprints, some will call you unreliable because they relied on your panic more than on your planning. If you stop replying at midnight, some will call you arrogant because their midnight felt like a test of your character. If you stop treating every flare as a divine command, some will whisper that you have changed. Let them be correct. Let them adjust. If their relationship with you requires strings, cutting them is not cruelty. It is clarity. The men who value your work will learn the new ritual. The men who valued your availability will find other hands. Crisis puppeteering feeds on one last mistake, confusing motion for meaning. When you are running, you feel necessary. When you are seated, you fear irrelevance. The fear is a liar. The seated man writes the instructions that prevent 10 fires. The running man saves one and tells a good story about it. Hume would ask you to count outcomes. Marcus would ask you to love the part of the day no one sees. Meaning is not loud. It is a steady line on a graph. It is the work done at the temperature of thought. It is the schedule defended without speeches. If you require a simple test to carry in your pocket when the bell rings, have 2 sentences ready to speak out loud, even if only to yourself. What is the evidence that this is a fire? What exact hour am I giving, and what will I not give? The first keeps you from renting your mind to noise. The second keeps you from renting your life to chaos. Speak them, then act. And when the smoke clears, because it always clears, even when the building is gone, do not make new promises until your hands have stopped shaking and your stomach has stopped bargaining for sugar. A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. Just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter. The 2 lines do not silence alarms. They teach you how to hear them without kneeling. There is a dignity in being the man who refuses to be dramatic about his duties. The room will not applaud it. The applause is reserved for the ones who arrive late and loud. Learn to be allergic to that reward. Learn to be addicted to the quiet metrics that do not trend. Your deepest work will be built in hours that no one interrupts, because no one thinks they have the right to pull your strings anymore. The first time you say, "not now," to a false fire, you will feel disloyal. The 10th time, you will feel free. The 50th, you will barely notice, because your life will no longer be oriented around testing whether you are good. You will be busy being good at something that does not burn. You do not need to become suspicious of the world to stop being its puppet. You do not need to become cold to remain calm. You do not need to become hard to refuse to be handled. You need to proportion belief to evidence and to protect your judgment until it is the last thing you give. You need to let your calendar say the truthful no that your mouth struggles to form. You need to remember that the man who runs at every bell cannot build, cannot love, cannot think. He can only run. If someone loves you only when you are running, they love the sound of your feet, not the shape of your life. One day, the bell will ring and you will go anyway, because it is real. You will verify and still sprint. You will give the hour and then some. You will act inside the calm that comes from having practiced calm. You will leave without announcing your exit, because the next hour belongs to the work you promised yourself. You will sleep without replaying speeches, because your role did not require one. And in the morning, you will read a line you have read before, and finally understand why it was written like a hammer and not like a hymn. Today, I escaped anxiety. Or no, I discarded it. And then you will put the hammer down and pick up your tools.